From the 1st of September, every single new car driving off a forecourt in this country carries a fresh set of digits in the middle of its number plate. And depending on exactly when you buy, sell, or trade in around that date, it can genuinely affect how much money changes hands. Let's break down exactly what the 76 plate means, how the timing actually plays out for buyers and sellers, and where the real financial traps sit if you're not paying attention to the calendar. The system itself is straightforward once you understand the formula, and it's been running unchanged since 2001. UK number plates carry an age identifier, 2 digits sitting in the middle of the registration, that update twice a year, every March and every September. Cars registered between March and August this year carry the number 26, simply the last 2 digits of the year itself. Cars registered from the 1st of September onward, right through to the end of February next year, take that same year number and add 50 to it, which is exactly how you get 76. It sounds arbitrary until you realize the logic. Adding 50 specifically avoids any confusion with a genuinely different year's plate, keeping every registration instantly readable at a glance, regardless of which half of the year a car first hit the road. Here's why this particular date draws so much more attention than an ordinary Tuesday on the automotive calendar. September is one of the 2 busiest car buying periods of the entire year, and dealers plan their entire sales strategy around it. There's a psychological pull toward having the newest possible identifier on your car, and manufacturers and dealers both know it, which is exactly why the strongest promotions and the most aggressive stock pushes cluster specifically around the plate change window, rather than being spread evenly across the year. Let's talk about what this actually means for your car's value, because this is where a lot of buyers make decisions based on instinct rather than the actual numbers. A brand new car collected on the 31st of August carries a 26 plate. The identical car, off the same production line, collected the very next day, carries a 76 plate instead. It's genuinely the same vehicle, same specification, same everything. The only difference is a single-digit change tied purely to which side of midnight you happen to collect it. For most models, the actual difference in resale value between a 26 plate and a 76 plate from the same year is negligible. Both are still fundamentally 2026 cars, as far as any meaningful valuation is concerned. Where it does matter is perception. And perception genuinely does move money in the used car market, whatever the underlying logic might suggest it shouldn't. Buyers respond to freshness, and a car advertised with the very latest plate identifier tends to attract more interest and sell somewhat faster than an equivalent car sitting on the previous plate, even when there's essentially no meaningful difference between them beyond a few weeks of registration date. This effect tends to be strongest specifically on nearly new and lightly used vehicles, where the plate identifier is doing a lot of the work in signaling how recent the car genuinely is, and considerably weaker once a car is a few years old and buyers are focused on mileage, condition, and service history, rather than which specific half of a given year it first hit the road. Now here's the trap worth understanding if you're planning to buy new specifically around this date. The plate change weeks are consistently the busiest of the entire year for dealerships, which creates 2 problems working against you simultaneously. Lead times stretch considerably as demand surges, meaning the exact specification and color you want may simply not be available for weeks longer than it would be at a quieter time of year. And a car registered in early September starts depreciating from that exact date, meaning if you're paying a premium purely to secure the very newest identifier the moment it becomes available, you're often paying more for a car that begins losing value the instant you drive it away, in exactly the same way any new car does regardless of its plate. There's a genuinely useful piece of counterintuitive advice worth knowing here if you're relaxed about having the absolute newest plate the day it launches. Buyers who wait a few weeks after the initial rush, once dealers have moved through their launch week stock and demand has settled back down, often find sharper pricing on cars that are still technically brand new 76 registrations, simply because the dealership is now more motivated to move stock than they were during the opening surge when buyers were queuing up regardless of price. If you're selling rather than buying around this specific date, the timing question flips entirely, and it's worth thinking about from the opposite direction. Part exchange vehicles flood into the market in the weeks immediately following every plate change, as buyers trade in their previous car to fund a new one carrying the fresh identifier. That surge in used stock can soften prices for sellers trying to move a similar vehicle during exactly that same window, purely through basic supply and demand, rather than anything about your specific car changing in condition or desirability. If you've got some flexibility on timing and you're selling privately, listing either just before the rush of trade-ins hits the market or waiting until it's cleared through a few weeks later can genuinely put you in a stronger negotiating position than selling directly into the immediate aftermath of the plate change itself. Private and personalized plates add another layer worth understanding properly, because the rules here catch people out more than almost any other part of this system. The DVLA's core rule is simple. A private or cherished plate can only be fitted to a vehicle that's the same age or older than the plate identifier itself implies. If you're planning to buy a 76 format private plate specifically, the vehicle you want to fit it to has to be registered from September this year onward, or the DVLA simply won't approve the transfer. This works identically in reverse too. If you're selling a plate carrying a 76 identifier, it can't legally go onto a car that's actually older than that, regardless of what the buyer might prefer or assume. If personalization is part of your plan around this date, ordering both your private plate and any physical plate manufacturing well in advance is worth doing, since driving with an incorrectly displayed or improperly transferred plate is a genuine legal issue you want to avoid entirely, not just a cosmetic inconvenience. It's worth flagging something the DVLA does behind the scenes with every single plate release, because it occasionally becomes relevant if you're hunting for a specific combination. Ahead of every new plate launch, the DVLA blocks certain three-letter combinations from ever being issued, specifically those judged potentially offensive, misleading, or otherwise inappropriate. This list isn't published in advance, and blocked combinations are simply removed from the system before release, which is worth knowing if you're specifically chasing a particular combination for personal or sentimental reasons, and it happens to fall into a blocked category without any obvious reason why. It's worth understanding the mechanics of how these two-letter area codes at the start of every plate work too, since they add another layer of information that some buyers factor into their decision without fully realizing why. The first letter identifies the broad region where a vehicle was first registered, and the second identifies the specific local DVLA office that processed it. This means two cars, both carrying a 76 identifier, could still look meaningfully different depending on where in the country they were originally registered, and some buyers, particularly those purchasing used vehicles, do pay attention to this when assessing a car's history, since a plate showing an unexpected regional code on an otherwise local vehicle is sometimes worth asking a question or two about before committing. For anyone specifically shopping the used market rather than buying new, there's a genuinely useful trick worth knowing that plays out every single time a plate change happens. The moment a fresh identifier launches, the used car market gets an immediate injection of nearly new stock. Cars that were themselves registered on the previous plate just months earlier, now being traded in by owners chasing the newest number. These nearly new trade-ins, sometimes barely used and still well within their original warranty, often represent considerably better value than an equivalent brand new car carrying the fresh plate, precisely because that previous plate identifier carries a mild stigma in buyer perception, despite the underlying vehicle being essentially identical. If getting the actual newest number isn't a priority for you personally, deliberately shopping for exactly this kind of recently displaced, nearly new stock in the weeks following a plate change is consistently one of the better value plays available in the entire used car market. There's a practical detail worth remembering too if you're timing a purchase around your car's future MOT schedule, rather than purely its resale value. Registering slightly later in the calendar year, which is exactly what happens if you wait for the September release rather than buying in March, pushes your vehicle's first MOT test date correspondingly later too, since that first test falls 3 years from the actual registration date rather than from the calendar year itself. If you're planning your ownership costs out several years in advance, that few months difference in MOT timing is a genuinely minor factor, but worth having on your radar if you're trying to line up service and test schedules with other vehicles you already own. So let's bring this together into something you can actually use around this date, whichever side of the transaction you're on. If you're buying new specifically for the newest plate, understand you're likely paying a premium during the busiest, least flexible pricing window of the year, and that a few weeks' patience after the initial rush often gets you sharper pricing on an equally new 76 registration. If you're selling around this period, be aware that part exchange stock flooding the market in the weeks immediately following the change can soften your negotiating position, and timing your sale just before or a few weeks after that surge is worth considering if you have any flexibility at all. If personalization is part of your plans, get your private plate and physical plate manufacturing sorted well ahead of collection, and double-check the age-matching rule applies correctly to whatever vehicle you're fitting it to. And regardless of which specific plate a car ends up carrying, remember that for the vast majority of models, a 26 and a 76 from the same year hold essentially identical value once the initial weeks of pure novelty have passed. None of this is designed to suggest the plate identifier itself is meaningless. Clearly it isn't, given how much buyer behavior and dealer strategy genuinely revolves around it twice every single year. But understanding the actual mechanics behind why prices and availability shift the way they do around this date puts you in a considerably stronger position than simply reacting to the general excitement of a new plate hitting the road, whether you're the one buying, selling, or simply trying to understand why your own car's valuation might move slightly over the coming weeks. It's worth ending on the one check that genuinely matters regardless of which side of any of this you're on. Whenever you're seriously considering a used car, whatever plate it happens to carry, verify its actual first registration date directly, rather than relying purely on the plate identifier as a shorthand for age. A private or cherished plate carrying a 76 identifier tells you nothing reliable about the vehicle it's currently fitted to, since personalized plates can legally sit on vehicles considerably older than the identifier itself implies. A quick vehicle check using the registration number, available through several free online tools as well as the DVLA's own service, confirms the genuine first registration date in seconds, and it's a habit worth building into every used car purchase, regardless of how confident you feel about a seller's description. If this helped you plan around the 76 plate launch with a clearer head than the marketing around it usually allows for, hit subscribe, because I'll keep covering exactly this kind of practical car buying and selling information as it becomes genuinely relevant. The next plate change lands in March, and the same underlying logic we've covered today applies just as directly then as it does to September. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one.